Okay, do you hear me? It's working. Okay, perfect. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to start our next panel, which is entitled Myth, Tradition and Cultural Memory. And at the very beginning, I would like to share with you some technical information. First of all, those who following our conference on YouTube or Facebook can also comment on the presentations and ask questions to the speakers. All they need to do is just to comment below the streaming, and our colleagues will monitor these comments and forward them to the moderator, who is actually me right now, and also to the speakers. And the second important thing is that unfortunately Teresa Klimowicz, who would have given the first presentation today, could not join us. So that means that we will hear only three presentations today. And we would like to start with Katarzyna Kuligowska, who will deliver her presentation online. Katarzyna, are you with us? Do you hear us?
Good afternoon.
Okay, perfect. Just let me very briefly introduce you, and after I give you the floor. So Katarzyna Kuligowska, she is a doctor of humanities in linguistics. Her research interests include cognitive linguistics, ethnolinguistics, comparative linguistics, so I would say all kind of linguistics, so lexicology, Slovak phraseology and media discourse, and she works at the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. And the title of her presentation is Linguistic View of Landowning Elites in Polish Proverbs and Sayings. So Katarzyna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon once again. And yes, I would like to present the linguistic image of nobility as reflected in Polish proverbs mostly. The research material is derived from the dictionary by Samuel Adalberg, which is called Księga Przysłów, Przypowieści i Wyrażeń Przysłowiowych Polskich, published in Warsaw in 1894. The analysis encompasses over 500 proverbs, which reveal the attitudes of representatives of landowning elites. There are interactions with other social groups, and there are manners, there are behavior. So let's start with nobility. Nobility, according to Jan Stanisław Bystroń, was considered an innate trait passed on in the genes. It was believed that the gentry, nobility, and aristocracy, unlike the other members of Polish society, that is the bourgeoisie or the peasants, were descended from exceptional ancestors who came from far away. Moreover, their representatives were sometimes considered even physically different from other people. The supremacy of the representatives of the landed gentry was treated as a law established by God. The historian Jerzy Jedlicki uses even the word apartheid in reference to this situation. It is also reflected in the Proverbs, as we can see. Children of noblemen by birth are also nobles. The power of a nobleman is given from God, and an eagle does not give birth to a pigeon, which also describes this belief that someone could become a noble only by birth. The state of nobility is genetically related to the state of chivalry, and at the root of its formation was the process of immunization of large landed estates of chivalry, which its representatives received in connection with their military duties. The ideal of a nobleman's life, therefore, was, or should have been, chivalry, called noble virtue, as Bystroń called it in his work. In theory, a noble title was deserved by a man who was not only a nobleman from birth, but also consistently practiced his military skills and in his conduct demonstrated the chivalrous virtues, like courage, bravery, nobility, and selflessness. And here we have some examples of proverbs in which we can find these remarks. Virtue is a trait of a good lord. A virtue makes nobles, not barons. One must know how to be a nobleman, and so on. The reality, unfortunately, was very often far from ideal. The social group of rich landowners is characterized pejoratively in numerous proverbs, and the virtue is described as scarce feature. And examples. The richest are now leading the way, the virtues have given them away. Or there is neither virtue nor modesty in court. Or, for example, it is harder to become virtuous than to become a great lord. Such traits as lack of empathy, stinginess, profligacy, vindictiveness, stupidity, failure to keep one's word are severely criticized in analyzed proverbs. For example, affluence is associated with debauchery. Do not rely on a great lord and an old handrail. There is a bustle at home and the money is gone. The richer, the stingier. So these proverbs show nobles' vices. After the formation of the noble state, the landowning elites gained more and more new privileges, starting with the historic Košice privilege of 1374, which created the subjective right of the nobility in the fiscal field, which was a precedent for later obtaining the same rights in other fields. This one and subsequent acts made the king dependent on the nobility, increasingly limited the monarch's power, and gave representatives of the noble state virtually unlimited freedom. The nobility was subject only to those laws which it had itself established, and it had complete authority over the subject people. As Reverend Wincenty Skrzetuski wrote, our peasants have no freedom because they are not allowed to change their lord or their dwelling, while the lord is allowed to give them away, sell them, swap them, move them from village to village, etc. They have no property because not being masters of themselves, how can they be owners of property? They have no justice because they are not allowed to do anything under their own name, because our laws have not appointed them any court in which they could complain and reprimand themselves for the wrongs and annoyances inflicted on them by the landowners. This situation is also presented in proverbs. For example, the right of the rich happens to the detriment of the poor, or there is no law to oblige a lord, or the lord will never be blamed even if he does wrong. Adam Leszczyński lists three foundations of the landowner's power. First is bondage, second serfdom, and the third, the exclusive judicial jurisdiction, which allowed the lord to decide on the life and death of his subjects. The peasant's bondage was not only related to the economic aspect, that is, unpaid forced labor for the master. It also implied attachment to the land given to him by its owner. Peasants couldn't change their place of residence, couldn't seek better working conditions or a more benign master. Serfdom was an instrument of the nobles, power over the peasants, and its regularly increasing size resulted in the dissatisfaction of the subject and their hostility towards the landowners. And we have it in two first proverbs, the example of it. Nie dba o chłopa, tylko o pańszczyznę, which is in English, he doesn't care about the peasant, only about the serfdom. Or the second one, the peasant asks the master, but at the same time he carries a stone behind his bosom. This very negative attitude caused by enslavement and exploitation affected the quality of peasants' work, of course. They worked reluctantly, they didn't care about the productivity and prosperity of the farms. Piotr Kuligowski stresses, there was deliberate destruction of tools, doing work inaccurately or incorrectly, or slowly or inefficiently. It is confirmed in the following proverbs. The third fourth and fifth one. Kazał pan musiał sam, the Lord order, and he had to do it by himself. He goes like a woman to work in the landowner's field, which means reluctantly. Or a peasant works well when you watch over him. Frequent escapes of peasants posed a serious problem for the landowners, who gradually became more and more frustrated with the lack of labor. The incentive to flee was the fact that the burdens on the same lands were very different depending on the landowner. Michał Rauschert describes the fleeing of peasants as the most popular form of their resistance to the lords, and this threat often made the lords less brutal and less exploitative of their serfs. And point 6 is an example of this longing for freedom by peasants. A sheep loves salt and a peasant loves freedom. In the Proverbs studied, however, frequent change of masters was not recommended, as there was always a risk that the new owner would turn out to be more harsh or more demanding than the current one. Examples. A peasant who often changes his master wears poor clothes, or he who serves many lords walks without shoes, and so on. The landowners accused their subjects of laziness, of theft, drunkenness, and rowdiness. Drunkenness was called a peasant disease, but at the same time, the nobility profited greatly from the consumption of alcohol by peasants, as the propination laws obliged the serfs to buy liquor in distilleries or taverns owned by the landlords. This strong emphasizes there were other accusations as well. The peasant was stupid, sly, insincere, wayward, inherently inclined to evil, and he had to be constantly watched over and punished with a stick. Persuasion was ineffective against people who were denied independent thought. The consequences of resistance, evasion, and attempts to incite rebellion were severe punishments that each landlord was free to apply based on traditions that didn't derive from legal acts. Corporal punishment prevailed. Peasants had their hair pulled out, ears and noses cut off. Some of them were beaten to death. Sometimes death sentences were pronounced and carried out by hanging on the gallows. Rauscher stresses, until 1768, the only punishment for killing a peasant on one's own property was a fine. Apart from corporal punishment, there were also penalties, tributes to the landowner, and confiscation of household items or livestock. And here we have some examples of proverbs that expose these different forms of punishment. A peasant without a whip and serfdom is worth nothing. Killing a peasant is like killing a dog. Beat the peasant to the seventh skin, or he barely saved his ears. Jan Stanisław Bystroń wrote that the common understanding of the nobility's freedom was that it not only gave the landowning elites a wide range of privileges and rights, but also took off many of their duties, which often led to disregard for authorities, also royal, failure to carry out court rulings, and even criminal acts such as assaults, rapes, and rebellions. This unlimited golden freedom of the nobility, its consequences, and widespread indulgence for noblemen were also commented on in Proverbs. For example, children, jesters, and great lords are allowed everything. Everyone indulges to the rich. The follies of the rich are regarded as wise. The rudeness of a nobleman is considered a virtue. The landowner is always right. Noteworthy are proverbs that emphasize the interdependence of lords and peasants. In the moral order, serfdom of the 18th century was presented as a transaction. The peasant gives crops and labor. The lord allows him to use his own land, gives farm hands and care, wrote Leszczyński. The overwhelming predominance of lords over peasants in this arrangement was for the landowners a reflection of the eternal world order. However, oppressed peasants were aware that the prosperity of noble families largely depended on their labor. And here we can see the proverb, Nie ma chama, nie ma pana, which means no borrower, no master. Numerous proverbs illustrate the relations between the two social classes. Although those relations are not always described in a negative way, the pejorative assessment of them is definitely dominant. And here are some examples. The master depends on the subjects, and the subjects depend on the master. A generous master means a benevolent servant. With a stingy master, servants are thieves. Or the good lord is like a father. Analyzing the collected material, one can easily distinguish a group of proverbs that clearly highlight the contrast between landowners and peasants, covering various aspects of life, from daily activities, traditions, elements of spiritual and material culture, and differences in dining. And here are an example of such images. A peasant is made for work and a landlord for rest. You will know that a peasant at the job and the lord at the table. The peasant dies of starvation and the master dies of gluttony, and so on. One of the distinguishing features of the representatives of the noble state is the elegant clothes they wore, sewn from expensive and exclusive fabrics such as velvet, satin, or crimson. The colors of the outfits were also of great importance. And here are several proverbs that describe clothes of nobility. Your own crimson is more ornate than borrowed Goldilocks, or not everyone who wears cornflower blue is a nobleman. Velvets and satins do not make a man noble. The red and yellow boots to the table and the black boots out the door. We can see these red and yellow boots in the picture presented on the slide. Or virtue wears red. It can also be seen on the picture, in the picture where we can see these red parts of clothes. The names of parts of the nobleman's clothing were registered in Proverbs too. For example, choć bez kontusza, ale dzielna dusza. Although he doesn't have a kontusz, he's a brave soul. Kontusz as a symbol of nobility. Lepiej z Bogiem w kożuchu niż bez Boga w szubie. It's better with God in the sheepskin than without God in the shub. Shuba as an attribute of nobility, and the sheepskin, the clothes of the peasants. A cap on the head and a louse on the belly. A cap, czapka, also here is like a symbol of nobility. Hulaj dusza bez kontusza, szukaj pana bez żupana. Let's party with a kontusz. Look for a master without żupan. We can see żupan in the picture. The blue one is kontusz, and under kontusz, the man in the picture is wearing żupan, a red żupan. The contrast between the landowners and the peasants is sometimes highlighted in the opposition of the attributes characteristic of each group. For example, those who have manners can afford watches, skilled horses for the nobles and unskilled horses for wagoners, tin plates for the tenant, silver plates for the landowner. A peasant is born to plow, and a nobleman to wear a weapon. And finally, a saber for the lord and a pick for the peasant. An important component of material culture is cuisine and customs related to food consumption. The Proverbs clearly show that the very important feature of Polish cuisine until the beginning of 20th century was the huge difference resulting from the economic division of society. The diet of the landed gentry and peasants differed dramatically both in terms of quality and in terms of quantity. Pan je kiedy chce, a ubogi kiedy ma. The master eats when he wants, and the poor when he has food. Groats for us, and the borscht for the master. What is penance for the rich is the feasting for the peasant. The meat for them, and the soup for us. Masters will eat cabbage with eggs, and peasants like dogs with pork fat. Numerous proverbs note the extremely strong desire to attain noble status and get into a higher social class, which was extremely difficult as the nobility tried to achieve maximum distance from the rest of society. Karol Powłocki notes, the social structure of feudal Poland was like a cauldron of hands, backs, necks, and heads. The whole, sometimes monumental effort of all those hands, elbows, backs, and necks was aimed at fighting servitude, which was pulling men down to the bottom. For the age, for light, this instinct to break out of serfdom smoldered in almost everyone. We can also observe it in several proverbs. For example, choruje na pana, he desperately wants to become a nobleman. Szlachcic po babce, which is not a real nobleman, a nobleman by grandmother. The same with a nobleman from Barcice, Mr. Łabaj's son, which also describes not real nobleman. A peasant wants to be a nobleman wants to be a king. You will always recognize a peasant even if he becomes a nobleman. Or the last one, a master from a peasant is the worst. An important element of the picture of the nobility is the issue of great stratification of this group. The internal structure of the noble state was very complex, and the differences in wealth huge. Andrzej Zajączkowski states, on the one hand, we have the Radziwiłłs, Potockis, Czartoryskis, Sapiehas, whose annual income amounts to millions of zlotys, and on the other, thousands of hamlets in which the standard of living was no higher than that of the peasantry, and in some cases even lower. Among the proverbs, there is a frequent references to the low-income nobility and the life difficulties of its representatives. For example, the ancestors will not help if you are poor, or the owner of great ducks and white crows, which means the very poor nobleman. The same with the owner of empty barns, wet meadows, and dry lakes. He himself is the master and servant. Or the last one, although he has 6 estates, he has nothing to eat. So there are many proverbs that draw attention to these poor representatives of the gentry. Some proverbs contain the names of villages and surrounding lands and expose their exceptional fertility and the associated affluence of the owners of these areas, or on the contrary, infertility of the land and the poverty of its inhabitants. And here we have some examples. Kto ma wejsce podolane, może siadać między pany. The one who owns wejsce podolane can sit among the noblemen. So these places, these villages were very, very rich, and it was good to live there. The one who has Bożejowice, Polanowice, and Markowice can call the king Amicze or Amice. The one who could have both Księczyn i Gaj, he would have paradise here on earth. And on the other hand, we have these poor villages. Z Nitku nie ma pożytku. There is no use from Nidek. There is nothing from Witanowice. If you have Dobrojewo and Kwilcz, then keep quiet, noblemen. A special place in Polish paramyology is occupied by the representatives of Radziwiłł's family. One of them is the figure of Karol Radziwiłł, called Pani Kochanku, who was remembered as a very ambiguous and eccentric man. He was a favorite of the nobility, whose sympathy he gained through his extravagance and confidentiality. A less favorable picture of Prince Radziwiłł is presented in work by Jędrzej Kitowicz, in the subsection on the most famous drunkards in Poland under the reign of King August III. The author, Jędrzej Kitowicz, writes about Karol Radziwiłł as a debauched, indecent man, insulting others with his jokes. The author evaluates Karol Radziwiłł's morality and conduct. Quote, "It was nothing with him to shoot a man in the head like a dog, but such cases can be treated ordinary in the Radziwiłł's family." And here we have some proverbs that also describe this historical person. Król sobie królem w Krakowie, Radziwiłł w Nieświeżu. King is the king in Krakow and Radziwiłł in Nieśwież. Court with a decree and Radziwiłł with a musket. When you lie, do it like Radziwiłł does. Radziwiłł was happy to feast. He was really famous for his feast that he gave to the representatives of nobility.
Yes, Katarzyna, please conclude soon, okay?
Okay.
We are running out of time.
There are also other noble families mentioned in Proverbs, such as Sapiecha, Potockis, Czartoryskis, Ogliński, Rzewuski. They also describe the manners, the behavior of these lords. And finally, in several proverbs, we can find also less famous names. But their very presence in Proverbs is the evidence of the significant influence of their owners on the community in which they lived. For example, Obaczyn, co na to Čaplic. We'll see what Čaplic says to this, because Celestyn Čaplic was political activist and poet who was known in his community for his reliability and great knowledge, and he was often asked to be a mediator in arguments. Okay, and I'm going to conclusions. Since Proverbs form a literary genre that is deeply rooted in folk culture, the image of the nobility recorded in them is primarily an image seen through the eyes of peasants. Collective memory of the landowning elites is complex and concerns various aspects of life in Poland in the 15th to 18th centuries. The main determinant of this memory is the nobility's idea of itself, its belief in its uniqueness, and the confrontation of these visions with reality. Great deal of attention is paid to the mutual relations between landowners and their serfs. Bondage and serfdom very often constituted a form of oppression, some call it slavery, which is also mentioned in many examples. Furthermore, the Panellists describe the way in which the upper class behaved, dressed, and ate in comparison with the peasant class. They also commemorate specific representatives of the nobility, highlighting their attitudes or character traits, as well as specific villages which were evaluated in terms of the standard of living they offered. And in conclusion, the landowners have been described in Proverbs as a class of vain, conceited, immoral people, insensitive to the misery of subordinate individuals, treating peasants as soulless and mindless non-human beings, whose destiny is to work exhaustively for a master's prosperity. Paremias commemorating truly noble, virtuous, and gracious lords are rare exceptions. Here is the literature that I used, and thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katarzyna. I am very pleased that we heard the whole lecture devoted to linguistics, because I think that at Genealogies of Memory conferences it happens quite rarely. And in your presentation we could see how much can be preserved by language. So it was, in this context, quite fascinating. But now let's move to our next speaker, who is Uladzimir Kananovich, if I pronounced it well. Let me introduce you just very briefly. Professor Kananovich is a historian of late medieval and early modern Eastern Europe, and he obtained his PhD from National Academy of Sciences of Belarus. And his research interests focus on many aspects of medieval and early modern society and culture. And the title of his presentation is King Mindouh in Navahrudak, an aristocratic social memory in contemporary society.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, sure. Dear Misters, ladies, participants, all guests of the conference, thanks a lot for your for the possibility to come to Warsaw to offer my paper. As it was already mentioned, my paper is devoted to a particular case of how aristocratic memories became so persistent in contemporary societies. In particular, my paper deals with a king with many names: King Mindowe, Mindaugas in Lithuanian, Mindouh in Belarusian vernacular, Mendolf in Germanic languages, and this person is now firmly established in contemporary historiography as the founding father of medieval Lithuanian polity. In contemporary history, academic discourse. It's undeniable. Mindaugas, Mindowe is a founding father of Lithuanian polity. But anyway,
for the presentation, you can change the slides.
Okay, thanks a lot. But anyway, in spite of this foundational role of King Mindaugas in Lithuanian history, his memories, his stories, this character is still very contentious, very contentious. In fact, there are a lot of documents concerning this personality in the Middle Ages. But some of them are recognized as falsified, another as suspicious, and most of them concerns Mindowe's donations to the Crusaders, dating back to the 14th century. This fact made Mindowe's documents very suspicious, which legitimized Mindowe's donations to Crusaders. But anyway, in spite of written sources, there are another kind of social memory concerning Mindowe. There are special connections of Mindowe memories. Despite the contentious character of Mindowe himself, his stories, however, provide specific places for crucial episodes of his reign. In particular, Navahrudak in Belarusian vernacular, Navahrudak in Poland, Navagardukas in Lithuanian, Parva Navagardia or Parva Nova Urbs in Latin, provides a primary space for commemorating a supposedly first Lithuanian king. You know, there is a famous mountain or hill called Mindowe's hill at the outskirts of Navahrudak, or in vernacular, Mindouhova Gora. This site is commonly associated with king of Lithuania or Lithuania, Mindaugas. It's believed still now that Mindowe was buried under this hill. There are another sites of commemoration of supposedly first Lithuanian king, including Kernov, northwest of Vilnius, also Aglona in Latvia, and to some extent Vilna, contemporary capital of Lithuania, of Lithuanian Republic. And my question, why the memories, social memories of supposedly first Lithuanian king is so attached to Navahrudak? Why Navahrudak holds an important place in sharing Mindowe's memories? Why Navahrudak? What's the relation between supposedly first Lithuanian king and Belarusian or Black Ruthenian, according to historical terminology, place? What is this connection? What was the reason of this incredible marriage between first Lithuanian king and a particular, maybe capital town in Black Ruthenia, in Ruthenia Nigra, a vast area that includes now Navahrudak, Slonim, Volkovysk, Grodno. It's a middle Neman area. You can imagine geography, regions, areas geography. South of Neman River, from Slonim via Navahrudak to Volkovysk to Belovezha, nearly. It was area. But this area still holds a lot of memories of first Lithuanian king. In second question, why Mindowe's memories in general, and in particular, and aristocratic memories in general are so persistent, are so vivid in this particular area? What is the reason of this cultural phenomenon? To answer this question, let me take briefly an excursion into history. To begin with, the name of Mindouh appears for the first time in Teutonic, Prussian sources in the second half of the 13th century. It also mentioned in the Ruthenian, Galician-Volhynian chronicles, but without any connection to Navahrudak. According to Galician-Volhynian chronicle, it's Mindouh's son, Duke Wojciech, who rules in Navahrudak, but no connection to Navahrudak from Mindowe. Actually, the name of Mindowe was nearly unknown in Lithuania, Lithuania in the 14th, 15th, until early 16th century. This name was totally unknown in Lithuania. Even more, Lithuanian plenipotentiaries during the negotiations with the Crusaders in the early 15th century didn't recognize Mindowe as their ancestor. They refused to do this. They simply told, we don't know any Mindowe. No of our ancestors bore this name. Maybe it was a special tactics during the negotiations, maybe, but I don't think so. They really didn't know Mindowe until the early 16th century. And vice versa. The name of Mindowe was very known in particular areas of former Teutonic order, especially in present-day southeastern Latvia, around Daugavpils, Dvinsk, or Dinaburg in German, in particular site known as Aglona. We will turn to Aglona a little bit later. So it was until the 16th century known nearly exclusively in memory in Livonia, but partly maybe in Galician-Volhynian chronicles, but with no connection to Navahrudak, to Black Ruthenia. But something happened in the 20th, 30th centuries of the 16th century. In recently created Lithuanian chronicles, somewhere around 1530, created under auspices of Duke Bishop Paul Olgimond of Galshany. Galshany, it's a small town in northwestern Belarus, along the Belarusian-Lithuanian border. Mindowe imaged for the first time in Lithuanian chronicles. He appears there as the ancestor of Duke Olgimond Golshansky. And also he comes up as a grand. It was the first source where he came up as a Grand Duke of Navahrudak. It's understandable because at the time, at least one of Golshanskys exercised his prerogatives as governor in Navahrudak. And later, beginning from Maciej Stryjkowski, a new story of Mindowe appeared. In Stryjkowski chronicle, Mindowe for the first time appears not only as the Duke of Navahrudak, but also a place of his death, of his coronation, baptism, and death is firmly established. It was Navahrudak, according to Stryjkowski, where Mindowe was baptized, coronated, died, and later buried. It's very interesting because quite recently Stryjkowski declared something different. He advocated earlier for Kernave, Kernów in contemporary Lithuania, but later he changed his opinion he turned his attention from Kernave towards Navahrudak. Maybe because it's very interesting, amazing story anyway. In the 16th, in the 17th, 18th century, this historiographical version that Mindowe was a ruler in Navahrudak. Navahrudak was a place of his coronation, baptism, and death was already well established in contemporary Polish-Lithuanian historiography. For example, 16th century historian Albert Kwieciński in his two-volume Historia Lithuania mentions that Mindouh's coronation take place in the fields of Navahrudak, in Campus Novogrodensibus, because the town did not possess at the time an appropriate building for royal coronation. It's necessary to mention that both Stryjkowski and Kwieciński were very attached to the family of Radziwiłł. Radziwiłłs acted as their commissioners. And also, we have not only new, recently created stories, narratives of Mindowe, but also a process of specialization of Mindowe's social memories began. You know how aristocratic memory functions. It's a cultural phenomenon. Grand landowners used land in several different ways. They not only obtained incomes from their inherited lands, but they also used land, more precisely local topography, landscape, to fix their own memories, stories. Every forest, field, mount, hill becomes a site of memory, bearing a part of their family or personal memories. Using different, because of ancient mnemonic methods known as memory palace of lieu de mémoire, according to Pierre Nora. And in this way, ancient aristocracy, not only in our area, in our region, but elsewhere, used landscape to fix their memories, a procedure that enhanced memories. This method was first described by late antiquity philosopher Cicerone. Memory palace, indeed, I need to say, I meet this phenomenon also in the area of Navahrudak, especially at the time when many members of the House of Radziwiłł acted as Navahrudak chiefs or were Palatines. I mean, in the 6th, 17th, 18th century, many members of this house ruled in Navahrudak, including John Nicolas Faustin, George Radziwill, nearly entire 18th century. It was Radziwillian period, Radziwillian era in the history of Navahrudak. And at the time, Mindowe's hill was first mentioned in local sources, in local regions. Chronologically, the first appearance of Mindowe's hills, Mindovgava Gora, in local sources, legends, coincided with the rule of different members of Radziwill family in the city. Is there any connection between Radziwills and memorial landscape around Navahrudak? I guess so. Because it's known that Radziwills not only supported numerous historiographers, writers, but they also largely contributed to the creation of local memorial landscape. You can see it's also a photo from 1930s. Navahrudak, Góra Mindowe, to po-polsku. Here it's very important. It's a genealogical table of the house of Radziwill. However, it's not easy to distinguish, but you can. But believe me, in this table, Mindowe, the name of Mindowe is also present. Mindowe is called as one of Radziwill's ancestors. Of course, not direct ancestor, but as a member of an indirect branch under the name Mindouh. It's F at the end. You can see. 2 minutes. You see. So I suppose that it was the Radziwills who accomplished a great work of memory in the area. They not only supported, they not only created and developed stories of Mindouh, but also they contributed to the specialization of Mindowe's memories in the area. In the land of Navahrudak, was something kind of palace of memory, at least until the end of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But what happened later? With the confiscation of hereditary lands by Radziwills, this memorial landscape was partly ruined, and many memories were lost. Of course, many memories remained vivid, and some of them were persistent. This concerns also, you see, it's 16th, 17th century pictured drawing describing Mindowe's coronation in Navahrudak. It's imaginative. It's also, but even after Radziwills had lost their political power in the area in the 19th century, their memories were persistent. And memory of Mindowe was among those elements of their cultural memory that survived until our days. Memories of Mindowe in the area around Navahrudak were not only persistent and vivid, but they, until now, are largely exploited by new intellectual elites, mainly from peasantry. I mean, also Belarusian and Lithuanian historiography. In Belarusian historiography, it's nearly entirely accepted that Mindowe's coronation might have taken place, namely in Navahrudak. Of course, Lithuanian colleagues contested this version. They advocated for Kernave as an alternative place for Mindowe's reigning, baptism, coronation, and death. But there is also this, you see, Navahrudak memorial landscape, very athletic landscape, easy to fix memories to this landscape. It's an imaginative picture of Navahrudak in the 16th century. It's a memorial desk commemorating Navahrudak, Mindouh, established on the feet of Mindowe's hill. It's all, but it's now Lithuania. Lithuania. This is Mindaugas Sameliškis. It's Aglona. It's also its monument devoted to Mindouh, to Mindowe, Mindaugas. Actually, now you have three alternative competing sites of memory: Navahrudak, Kernave, Aglona in Latvia. Three nations, three sites of memory. Maybe for another one would appear, Vilno. Now some memories of Mindaugas attached by Lithuanian intellectuals to Vilnius. Bridge, Mindaugas Bridge, Mindaugas monument in the center of Vilna. So I just conclude. The case of king of supposedly first Lithuanian king Mindowe, Mindaugas Mindouh, provides an interesting case of how aristocratic memories may have been preserved in contemporary society. How this memories can be exploited by contemporary politicians and intellectuals. And finally, the last sentence. The memories of supposedly first Lithuanian kings are at present in constant process of being interpreted and reinterpreted, invented and reinvented, narrativized, even ritualized, etc., etc. Maybe in future we will see another versions concerning Mindowe's history. Thanks. Thank you so much, and sorry for...
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was also interesting to see how aristocracy emerged as actors who created their own memory.
In our society.
Yeah.
And first of all, it's land that bear the memories of former aristocracy.
Yeah, they impose their own meanings on the landscape. Yes, this is very interesting.
Heritage, not only oral traditions, but first of all, land that still preserve memories of former aristocracy in the area.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Long story. I don't want to.
Yeah, we have no time to discuss in details at the right moment, but maybe later. So let me introduce now our third speaker, who is Péter Erdősi. He's an assistant professor at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. He has been associated with many universities in Hungary, and his research interests include early modern history, historiography, Renaissance, Baroque cultural history, and urban heritage. And the title of his presentation is From Neo-Baroque Society to Baroque Heritage, Changing Perceptions of the Hungarian Autocracy, 20th and 21st Centuries.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and dear colleagues, I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity of being here and speaking at the conference. And in my talk, I would like to examine the contested memory of the early modern Hungarian aristocracy. In this course is traced from the late 19th century. My focus will be on the 20th century, but I need to prepare the scene by having a look at the 19th century events. And a major factor and this is, I guess, the key of the thesis, a major factor of the perception of aristocracy in cultural memory was the imagined or perceived link, association between the aristocracy and Baroque culture. And this link was rooted in a vision of history that saw the Baroque as a foreign cultural import and the aristocracy as a subservient agent of foreign interests opposed to national progress. The involvement of some Hungarian aristocratic families in the, quote, absolutist policies of the Viennese court between the 16th and 18th centuries was an important theme in 20th century historiography. Nationalist stances and confessional dissent and conflict combined to denounce Catholic aristocrats as collaborators with the ruling Habsburg dynasty. This criticism was expressed in the historical accounts of Baroque as a style of the aristocracy and the Catholic Church, a foreign cultural product dissonant with the perceived values of national culture. Obviously, this approach was, of course, biased. And this approach ignored the very fact that many aristocrats had made significant contributions to the development of national culture. And this exaggerated and negative view of the aristocracy as well as the Baroque, of course, no longer stands the test of historical criticism, but they are interesting from the point of view of the history of ideas, since they document the concerns and criticisms of the post-feudal survival of the power and influence of the feudal aristocracy within the framework of a modern democratic political system. It is also noteworthy how these views have changed or were changing over time. Thus, at the intersection of historiography and heritage studies, our analysis of the changing academic and popular perceptions of the Baroque allows us to explore the contrasting attitudes towards the surviving patterns of the aristocracy's impact on Hungarian politics, society, and culture after its decline. The negative attitudes against Baroque were linked to the Hungarian perception of the Habsburg court of Vienna, and this can be traced back to a key problem of early modern Hungarian history. The sovereign kingdom of Hungary ceased to exist after the disastrous Battle of Mohács in 1526 as a result of the Ottoman conquest of Hungary. The Habsburg dynasty gained royal power in the western part of the country, not occupied by the Turks, while in the east of the former Hungarian kingdom, the Transylvanian princes settled down with Ottoman support. The result was the presence of two opposing, rivaling courts, also associated with a confessional conflict between the Catholic Habsburgs and the predominantly Protestant Transylvanian princes. While historiography tended to describe the Transylvanian court as a receptor of the Renaissance and as an agent in its incorporation into Hungarian culture, it associated the Viennese court with the Baroque and the Catholic Church. For the strand of national public thought in the 19th and 20th centuries that associated Protestant grievances with those of the nation, the anti-Habsburg stance also gave rise to an aversion to Baroque culture. The end of Ottoman occupation in the late 17th century, the reunification of Hungary by the Habsburgs, and then the concomitant progress of the Catholic Church and the Baroque style, the Viennese orientation of Catholic aristocratic families, and the grievances of Protestants all made the 18th century a very important juncture for our topic. Although it can be argued that Hungary, which lost the Revolution and War of Independence of 1848-49, benefited from the establishment of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy in 1876 by reconciling with the Viennese government, Its opposition kept anti-Habsburg sentiments alive. According to the art historian Ferenc Pulszky, one of the authors of the representative book series known as the Kronprinzenwerk, the Österreichisch-Ungarische Monarchy in Wort und Bild, Hungarians in Transylvania rejected the Baroque, the art of the Counter-Reformation. Another author contributing to the same volume, Gyula Pasteiner, stressed the delay in the reception of Baroque, suggesting that this style, art and cultural style, was not received in the 17th century when it was emerging in Europe, but only in the next one, and only with the help of foreign intellectual capital. So the judgment of the Baroque was much more than a critique of style. It was also expressed in categories of political, social, and confessional oppositions. The themes of the Habsburg dynasty's rule in Hungary, its relationship with Vienna and Rome as Catholic strongholds, the courtly relations, and the authority of the Hungarian aristocracy and clergy, and the resistance to these, all influenced the historical depiction of Baroque. Anti-Habsburg sentiment in some sections of the society survived the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the dethronement of the dynasty. However, the period between the two world wars saw significant changes in the appreciation of Baroque. It was in the interwar period that scholars constructed Baroque as a distinct period of Hungarian cultural history. This change, of course, was due to an international transformation of perception and taste, largely following the lead of Wölfflin, the art historian, introducing the idea of eternal Baroque. The Geistesgeschichte paradigm of historiography has transformed the concept of the Baroque from an art historical category into a broader term of cultural historical significance. And some Hungarian researchers in this period have adopted this scholarly approach. In the light of new foreign research, it became clear to them that Baroque was a distinct stage in the history of European culture, obviously, and then they were now concerned with how to apply this category to their national history. So in the rewriting of Hungarian national history between the two world wars, Baroque was no longer necessarily dismissed as unnational. Its products, previously excluded from the national canon, were now revalued as important parts of it. But researchers have been now confronted with increasingly complex problems, particularly with the unity and the diversity of the period, its temporal scope, where it is in time, its political and social connotations. When should the Baroque in Hungary be dated? Who transplanted it? Whose culture was it? Was it Magyarized, or was it accompanied by the sense of alienation, maybe? Confessional differences among historians made this gradual acceptance conflictual, as shown by the debate between Gyula Szekfű, the influential Catholic historian of the interwar period, and his Protestant opponent, Elemér Májusz. The broad scope of Geistesgeschichte, enabling the construction of a cultural period, has tempted scholars to create a synthesis. In this process, an organizing principle, a general image, could be useful, around which the historian's narrative could be organized. Gyula Szekfű used the image of peaceful tranquility and equilibrium as such a principle in his work on the establishment of Baroque culture in the 18th century. In his opinion, the Baroque style adopted by the Hungarians did not carry the political ideology of the absolutist court of Vienna, but instead it expressed the harmony between the ruler and the society of orders. In a similar way, harmony was conveyed to the ranks of the society by the ideal type of a Baroque aristocrat who had authority and, in Szekfű's image, Szekfű's view, led the people without any coercion. This tranquility was shattered then, according to him, by the Enlightenment, when social struggle began. Szegfű's Protestant opponent, Elemér Májusz, proposed a completely different concept on Baroque. According to him, the Hungarian nation adopted Baroque earlier, so not in the 18th, but earlier in the 17th century, adopted it as a modern European tendency, and the spread of Baroque would have been possible without the Habsburg rule in the next century, but then the influence of the dynasty turned Baroque into an inflexible, rigid product. Hungarian resistance to Vienna ended up in a struggle against European culture, according to Májusz. Moreover, Hungarian aristocrats gave up the development of domestic culture for the benefits taken from Vienna and their own domestic courts on their possessions, which had previously played an important role in this field, in reception, in terms of reception of culture, began to decline now. The distance between the aristocracy, which had been devoted to foreign culture, and the declining lesser nobility, which had previously enriched culture together, this gap between the aristocrats and the lesser nobility was also starting to increase. The 18th century was no longer able to fuse foreign and Hungarian cultural elements, according to him. Their difference was also social. The aristocrats were primarily European, according to him, while members of the lesser nobility were primarily Hungarian. During the post-Ottoman reconstruction of the country, the alienating effect of the clerical and courtly Baroque on the people was for a time mitigated, at least, by the patriarchal care of the aristocrat who shouldered the burden of labor in reconstructing the country after the Ottoman conquest. But people were soon overcome by a Catholicism which delivered mechanical festive sensations, and by an international Jesuit culture which had no direct contact with the people, in Májusz's account. Although the 18th century Hungarian aristocrat had the undoubted merit in the reconstruction of the country, when he was drawn to Vienna, he could no longer escape the fascinating charms of court life, dissolved in the international culture of the capital, the imperial capital, and forget the political vocation of his ancestors. In the culture between the two world wars, the Baroque became in vogue, but this phenomenon also had its critics. This tension was given a particular color by the interference between Baroque and Neo-Baroque. The term Neo-Baroque was used to refer to an artistic neo-style, especially in architecture, a revival of the Baroque style, which was widespread in the art of late 19th century historicism. The style survived the turn of the centuries in Hungary and remained a feature of representative public and private buildings during the interwar period. It is from this survival that the second meaning of the word derives, coined by the same Szegfű, Gyula Szegfű, whom we have seen before, who turned the term Neo-Baroque into a powerful tool for depicting and criticizing society between the two world wars in his work published in 1934. He believed that the imitation of the Baroque forms in official architecture could not be accidental only. He looked for the social causes of this artistic phenomenon of imitation and found them in the servile imitation and in the empty respect for authority in the public life of the 1920s and 1930s. In his view, this deference was connected with the meaningless imitation of Baroque forms, a respect for form, externality, and authority which led to the perpetuation of mimicry, of lying. And Szegfű used the metaphor of Neo-Baroque society as a counterpole to his own image of the 18th century Hungarian Baroque society. According to him, the authority of the figure of the Baroque lord in the 18th century was now distinguished with a capital A, in contrast to the lowercase authority characterizing interwar public life. So the term Neo-Baroque, used in the context of social criticism, social and political criticism, which became fashionable in the 1930s, referred to more than the survival of the art form. It referred to concerns about the survival of the Baroque, which had an inherently dubious status for national history. It signaled concerns about the return and ossification in the modern age of forms and phenomena that had once passed away and had already become obsolete and empty. So the term Neo-Baroque society became a keyword, a catchword in intellectual debates between the two world wars, targeting the authoritarianism of contemporary ruling elites, comparable to the dominance of the Baroque aristocracy, comparable but also contrasted, reproaching it as an obstacle for the modern democratic transformation of the country. Now, after World War II, despite the declared official antipathy of the state socialist regime towards an obsolete feudal society, in the relative ideological relief and thaw following Stalin's death and the revolution of 1956, the consolidation of Baroque as an accepted component of the country's cultural history and heritage continued, together with the gradual improvement of the memory of some representatives of the aristocracy, in a time by which most representatives of this elite group had emigrated from Hungary, were deprived from their own benefits or declassed. The negative perception of both the Baroque and the aristocrats of bygone times started to change into a more nuanced attitude. Though the scholars of the 1960s to the 1980s officially distanced themselves from the Geistesgeschichte paradigm of the interwar period, they went on with the process of establishing Baroque as a distinct period of Hungarian cultural history. Now they had to reconcile this ambition with the demands of the official Marxist historical narrative. For example, the eminent literary... Okay, thank you. For example, the eminent literary historian Tibor Klanicai, in a 1960 study of the emergence of Hungarian Baroque literature, created a new concept of Hungarian Baroque. He overrode the religious connotations that had previously influenced the interpretation, and now basically he claimed that Baroque was not associated only with the Catholic lords, but also with the Protestant nobility, in general with the domestic creative aristocracy. And basically he rejected the idea that Baroque was just a foreign import, a cosmopolitan trend, or a function of Habsburg expansion. So something was finally, or at least for a long term, settled. Baroque era was canonized, and the negative content of the previous link between national history, aristocracy, and the interpretation of the Baroque evaporated. And in the post-communist era, we observe how under the new concept, the newly emerging concept of cultural heritage, the former controversies and antagonisms surrounding the Baroque could be eased. For example, in the year of Central European Baroque, the year of the Baroque declared as such by the Central European Initiative, it was at the agenda to show the common Central European Baroque, and the historian Robert G. Evans wrote that it's time for Baroque heritage to take finally its rightful place in the culture of the territories once ruled by the Habsburgs. So after this, let me come to a conclusion. It is worth highlighting that after the regime change in Hungary, there is no large-scale return of the aristocracy, renewal of the public influences, and recovery of its assets. I think that finally, as a result of the 1960s and 1980s, Baroque has its position in national cultural history. So the ideological bundle or ideological shell or context, which was so obviously negative and biased, has evaporated. But it's a question of what contemporary Hungarian society will do with this new opportunity. Whether we can incorporate new meanings as a result of refreshed research into our knowledge. And the big question is, nevertheless, whether the resurgent interest in the aristocracy and the Baroque milieu will contribute to the consolidation of a new Neo-Baroque society because of the reverence to the externalities of this culture. So such a consequence would be completely at odds, and this is my conclusion. Such a consequence would be completely in contrast with the devoted research and at the same time affectionate, ironic, and distanced portrayal of family history, aristocratic family history by a descendant of one of the most important Hungarian aristocratic families, the writer Péter Esterházy, who in his prose and most notably for our topic in his Harmonia Celestis, a set of numbered sentences from the life of the Esterházy family, described an archetypal father figure, quote, "My father, this grim Baroque lord who raised his eyes to the Emperor Leopold I, his face serious, though his glittering, squinting eyes as always betrayed him, and said, 'It is hard to lie, Your Majesty, when one does not know the truth.' And so he mounted his horse and rode off into the sensitive 17th century landscape." And this is my last sentence. How the memory of the Baroque and the aristocracy will evolve in the future can perhaps depend on whether contemporary culture is able to take the kind of initiative that Esterházy's work did, both cherishing a tradition and also rethinking, questioning a tradition. And perhaps the present text could also contribute to this process by providing some historical or historiographical support. Thank you so much for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much. I really like the last slide of your presentation with Péter Esterházy. I encourage everyone to read this book. Harmonia Celestis is a masterpiece of Hungarian postmodern literature. And if you think that Baroque belongs to the past or it is anachronistic to speak about it, you can also visit Budapest and see the renovation works in the castle. The whole castle hill is being renovated right now in a Baroque or Neo-Baroque style, which is a quite controversial initiative, I would say. Thank you once again for all of the presentations. And now I would like to give the opportunity to Elżbieta Kwiecińska, who will comment on all of the presentations. I will briefly introduce her. She's an assistant professor at the Institute of Slavic Studies at the Polish Academy of Sciences, and she holds a PhD from the European University Institute, Florence. Elżbieta, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your kind invitation. Thank you for your very interesting papers. What we can find in common is that the myths that are presented here tell us more about ourselves than actually about the objects they are describing. The panel was structured in a way that it combines Polish, Belarusian, and Hungarian aspects that reflect our mental map, what we can see about those myths, that they are more than about national myths. The first paper that presented Katarzyna Kuligowska lies very much in contemporary Ludowa Historia Polski, people's history of Poland, but it adds another aspect, which is social-linguistic aspects, and this is, I think, what we can benefit a lot as from interdisciplinary research. As a historian, I would say it's a fantastic example of a history from below as a source, and it shows us the auto-stereotype of Szlachta that conflicts very much with what peasants expressed in the Proverbs. And as we know, Proverbs were the way where how the social conflict could be managed, and when it could not be managed by peasants complaining themselves and receiving an answer, it was a way for them to show dissatisfaction or feelings. So my question is to Katarzyna Kuligowska, how to interpret this auto-stereotype, this conflict between auto-stereotype of Szlachta, which is a chivalry, and on the other hand, what you described from the Proverbs, which is complaint, right? And that this picture of the Szlachta is very much in contrast what Szlachta thought about themselves. So this is my first question to Katarzyna Kuligowska. And Uladzimir Kananovich, while Katarzyna's Kuligowska paper was more like a deconstruction of the Szlachta image, Uladzimir Kananovich provided us a construction of the myth. And while some sources are falsified, it's also telling why we falsify the sources. And in the local context of Navahrudak and the construction of the myth of Radziwiłł, it turned out to be important. However, the myths they appear, as Uladzimir Kananovich said, it's very present in the local context. But my question is, what's the role of the myth of the Mandogas and in the context also of the Lithuanian Duchy of the Lithuanian past, the Great Duchy of Lithuania? What is its role in the Belarusian diaspora? Because what strikes me is that Belarusian diaspora is rather of a democratic stance, while this is an aristocratic myth. The third paper, it was very particular to me, very interesting, because I was, as we are thinking about a mental map, I was thinking what kind of analogies I can find in current discussion in Polish or Ukrainian history. And it's hard to, we can find, but it's hard. And, the critique of a style as, being foreign in native, and the question of empire, nation, who is a traitor, who is not a traitor. I wouldn't say we have a critique of an architectural style as such an important debate in Polish or Ukrainian history. So I find it very particular, and the concept of a Baroque society. This is also very, very interesting, and the way how it was revalued in the national canon, and what we can find here is like a recovery and acceptance of this Baroque society. And my question is also about the contemporary, as it's for me hard to ask about the Hungarian sources. So in the current political situation and the question of aristocracy, is it debated as a political question under the Orban regime? So, or is that just a historical? Does it have as a meaning in the political conflict in Hungary now? Yes. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Elżbieta. And now I would like to give the opportunity to our speakers to reflect on these remarks and commentaries. I suggest to do it in the order of your presentation. So first Katarzyna, then Uladzimir, and the last one will be Péter. Katarzyna, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. It is quite difficult to answer the question about this gap between the image of nobility that we remember from history and the emotions that appear in Proverbs, all these fears, all this pain and misfortune that the peasants felt. I think that we can find the question in the fact that we all need national myths. We want to think well about our history. We all like heroes, and that's why we look at Polish Szlachta. Well, we evaluate most of these people from historical point of view. We evaluate their work, their contribution to Poland as a state. But in fact, I think we talked very little about the real fate of the peasant during serfdom, and I think that last few or maybe a few years or maybe even more, it's the time when historians started to study this aspect of our past, of Polish history, and they started to draw attention to the peasants' fate and how the nobility really treated other people, how they looked them, how they tried to dehumanize the peasants. There are many books that have been published recently on that aspect. I think they will help to find the answer for many questions concerning this huge gap between the image of nobility and the image that nobility had itself, the evaluation they have for themselves, and the image that comes from the lower states experience.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Uladzimir.
Thanks a lot for your question. Your question was, what's the role of Mindowe in contemporary Belarusian history?
Diaspora.
And diaspora. Yes. Thanks a lot for your question. I need to say that the role of Mindowe, Mindaugas in all languages is very important in Belarusian historiography, both inside Belarus and abroad, within contemporary Belarusian diaspora. Nearly all Belarusian historians whom I know, they agree that Mindouh was really baptized, coronated, and died and buried in Navahrudak. In Belarusian historiography and diaspora as well, Navahrudak as Mindouh's site of baptism, coronation, and death is well established now. Especially among diaspora, including also some Polish historian of Belarusian origin in Białystok. You know, maybe Professor Latyshonek from Białystok, who also advocates his story, but recently he began to revise his previous version. But I repeat once again, in Belarusian diaspora, Navahrudak as Mindouh's place of coronation, baptism, and death, and
so it's an identity.
Is well established. Uncontested. Okay. For most Belarusian historians.
Does it have an anti-Russian also aspect or not?
No, because I cannot say so. I cannot say so.
Okay.
I cannot say so. Of course, Lithuanian historians are strongly opposed to this version.
It's rather a question of Lithuanian, Belarusian.
Yes, it's a very strong controversy between contemporary Belarusian and Lithuanian historians. As for Mindaugas place of coronation, baptism, and death. It's the point that divides contemporary Belarusian and Lithuanian historians. Most of Lithuanian historians, beginning from Egidijus Gudavičius, Artūras Dubonis, grand specialist of Lithuanian Academy of Sciences, they say no, it's a myth. It's a myth. They advocate for mostly not for Vilna, but for Kernavę as Mindaugas in Lithuanian vernacular as Mindaugas place of coronation, baptism, and death. Even Lithuanian national holiday, statehood day, 6th July is coronated by festivities in Kernavę. So there is Mindaugas memory is a point where Belarusian and Lithuanian historians are posed.
Thank you.
In both historiography, the role of Mindaugas is very, very important. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And now, Péter, if you are ready to answer the questions.
Thank you very much for the questions. It's actually two questions in one, and both are very stimulating. One track or one branch of the question is whether there is a major debate around Baroque or the survival of Baroque, and I would say this bondage between the academic reading of Baroque and political and ideological stances that characterize the 20th century are not really there anymore, I guess. Neither the Catholic-Protestant confessional conflict is a major player in this debate with the ongoing secularization of the country. But what I guess is an important point to think about is what kind of Baroque is that we have at hand, especially what the popular perceptions of the Baroque are. It's so easy to associate Baroque with the externalities like this spectacle and grandeur and even power. And I think power is a key moment in the understanding of this one. But on the other hand, on the other side of a gap, what I see as a gap, there is a multiple and diverse and ongoing research of Baroque art and Baroque literature, which of course produces much richer images, of course, disseminated among academic circles and not in more widely. So what I see here as a question is what kind of depth will be given to the perception of Baroque, especially in the heritage machinery of places heritageized. And the other branch or the other ramification of the question about whether the aristocracy and the role of aristocracy is still contested or debated. I in the Orbán regime, I guess it is not so much the aristocracy that were. It's not so much the aristocracy which creates a field of debate, but I guess it's the various techniques of historical legitimation the Orbán regime uses to show itself as a restorer of peace, of normality. This is, I think, behind the major investment into the reconstruction of the royal palace in Buda Castle, to bring back the track of history after the communist period into the interwar period, representing the interwar period as the last moment of normality, as the last moment of peace before the war started. It's like a pre-war period idealized, and I guess in this effort, all kinds of layers of history are at play. And Baroque homes of the aristocracy and the nobility are not an exception. And that's where I see debate in Hungarian society, because of course this is not accepted consensually or unanimously by the intelligentsia or society as such. So I'm not going into the details of to what extent the heritage protection system is weakened in order to give room to political and economic uses of architectural heritage. But I might allude to the fact that, which is a recent development, that after a serious effort of spending money into the renovation and restructuration, recreation of castles and palaces, such as the former palace of the aristocratic family of the Esterházy was made. So after this effort, there is a new turn in which seemingly the state has decided to give some part of national heritage into private hands, which then, of course, poses the question as to how the former homes of a former elite are reused in order to create a status symbol for a newly emerging elite. And then, if that's the case, again, the question can be formulated: what kind of tensions there will be between the heritage versions of Baroque culture and the academic knowledge on Baroque. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. We have still some time, so I would like to open the discussion. Feel free to ask questions to our speakers if you have any. I see here 2 persons.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very interesting speech on the Baroque. Inspired me to the question what the other branches, the historical branches, the specializations, did they follow this pattern of Geistesgeschichte? Did they follow cultural history, or had all these branches, these academic subjects, had their own narratives? To my mind, it should be possible that there were competing patterns of narratives, and did a competition take place, or was it a orchestrated version?
So I said just to collect more questions. Here I see 2 persons.
Yeah, thank you very much. These were really very interesting presentations, and I would like to ask the first presenter that can you detect the presence of these proverbs even today in the contemporary society, or these are just historical in historical sources? It would be my question, and to my other question is to my Hungarian colleague. I also learned a lot from this presentation. But what do you think that if Gyula Szekfő start to use this Neo-Baroque as a kind of criticism, as far as I understood well, couldn't it be a kind of memory game when he didn't use the neo-feudalistic as a kind of critic? Because if you say that it's a neo-feudalistic structure or style or something in Hungary, it could be a strong criticism towards Horthy or towards the own Hungarian system. If you say Neo-Baroque, it's a kind of Habsburg-like, European, how to say, so it makes such a context that maybe it can ease the responsibility of the own elite a bit, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a failure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bartek.
Thank you for the papers. I just have a short comment to Professor Kuligowska, because the last proverb that you mentioned was the one saying about how Piekarski was lying, and I believe exactly this one does not match your paper, because that refers to the tortures that he experienced after the attempt of murdering the King Sigismund III in 1620. So I think it's not about him as a gentry, but about simply the fact that he was tortured. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a question to Péter Erdősi. I would like to ask you about any expressions of this official hostility towards the Baroque heritage during the socialist era, and were there any expressions of this hostility in the form of, for example, destructions of some monuments of I don't know, churches, country houses, some Baroque buildings that were destroyed, also because of their Baroque form, or these historical associations with this period in Hungarian history. So, thank you.
Okay, so Péter, would you like to start answering questions?
Yes. Thank you so much for every question I've been given. So for the first question, I think these are competing visions. These are controversies of the interpretation, but they are also consecutive to each other. So I guess the first big paradigm is to see Baroque only as a style of art, as an art style. In the 19th century, it was typical to, of course, interpret Baroque as a bastard Renaissance, and that was characterized. This idea was characterizing the late 19th century Hungarian art history, and then the Geistesgeschichte paradigm brought about the idea of the existence of a Baroque Geist, a Baroque spirit, or a Baroque mentality, which then helped the diverse branches of the humanities to cooperate. That was, I think, an important novelty to Geistesgeschichte paradigm, when you could think of the consonance or the unity of a cultural era, where you could study together the findings of art history and music history or literary history. And next we have the Marxist paradigm, which tries to give a social content. And the example that I refer to, Klanica is a fort. Tibor Klanica is a fort was an effort to somehow synchronize the study of form, I mean the aesthetic aspect, and the social aspect of the studies of the Renaissance. So I think they were competing versions, but finally even the Marxist paradigm gave up with the end of the communist period, and I think after which there is no major compulsory paradigm to which researchers are supposed to adapt their vision of the Baroque. I think it is the vision of Baroque as a European phenomenon, and now it is stripped from its confessional content. Obviously, that's what I sense. And the other question about the coinage of the term Neo-Baroque by Gyula Szekfy, this is very, very tricky, because this is a term that's used to criticize interwar period society, but it is also, in a way, a rehabilitation of Baroque in a way. And I think your point is very right, because Szekfy had a major opponent in a debate about the very term Neo-Baroque, behind which there was the content of criticizing interwar period and the idea of authority and the idea of a feudal society. He didn't use feudal. That could have been, or even was even used by Marxist historiography later. But László Németh claimed that basically by using the term Neo-Baroque, Szekfy tries to dissolve or evaporate his own responsibility in the ideological making of the interwar period. Because as I mentioned, and as you know it very well, Szekfy was a major official kind of official historiographer of the era. So László Németh, as a Protestant opponent of the Catholic Szekvű, claimed that the criticism is just superficial, because by using this term he wants to, hide his own responsibility in the making of the Horthy era. And as for the third question is concerned, it's not so much the deliberate destruction, but I guess neglect, which characterized the period vis-a-vis this architectural heritage. But neglect is also a broad term, because, well, the Palace of Gödöllő, which is close to Budapest, and it's a aristocratic home of the Grasalkovich family, and later dedicated to the wife of the Emperor Franz Joseph Sissi, and now it's a kind of a national lieu de mémoire again that was turned into a Soviet barrack. So this kind of reusal, very creative reusal of the space, which is debated in many sections of the conference, was characterizing this scenery. But I would just mention one case which is about deliberate destruction, or at least the idea of destroying something deliberately. This is a Baroque church in Batyányi Square in Budapest, where a metro station was about to be built, and there was the official discourse that this is to be destroyed because, it is contrary to the expectations of the metro construction. But in an anecdotic way, in a memoir of a monumental protection expert, we know we kind of know that somehow an expected visit by Stalin was construed to legitimize the planned destruction of this particular church, which finally didn't happen. And I think this is partly due to the brave stance of the monument protection expert. So it's not so much the destruction that I would mention, but there was a sense of official hostility. And Klanitzei, whom we just happened to mention, Tibor Klanitzei, the literary historian, I guess in order to contrast this official ideological hostility against the legacy of the Baroque era and the aristocratic families, rather early in the mid-1970s, came up with the idea that now we are in the post-revolutionary situation. The revolution is won. And in a situation when the revolution is won, the leading group, the new elite, doesn't have to, fight against the remnants of the former elite. Therefore, and here comes the interesting, ingenious invention, therefore we can enlarge the concept of national heritage. Now it's not only the radical or the progressive trends that can be considered as part of the national, but a winning political power after the success of a revolution can give the obvious effort, can make the obvious effort to take everything as national. So this is a very interesting reinterpretation of the national heritage in a Marxist setting. And Baroque could kind of, be put under this umbrella concept of national heritage as early as in the 1970s, within the same paradigm of the official Marxist historiography, which was like a shell for many diverse historiographical efforts. Thank you very much for the informed question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now, Katarzyna. So the question is whether these proverbs still used in everyday language. And if I may add one point to your presentation, I think that some of your proverbs you mentioned in your presentation could be easily translated into Hungarian language. Not all of them, but some of them. So I think that on the basis of these proverbs existing in various languages, you could even draw a kind of transnational history of aristocracy in our region. And I'm wondering what you think about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Well, in fact, I think that just few proverbs we can still find in contemporary Polish language. Now I'm thinking about two examples. The first one is kazał pan, musiał sam, which means the master ordered and he had to do it by himself. And the other one maybe pańskie oko konia tuczy, which means that the work is done well when the worker is watched over. I think that one could find some more proverbs that are still used or at least remembered by Polish speakers, but not very many of them are used in contemporary language. In Kamil Powłocki's book called Chamstwo, he draws attention to one more thing that still exists in contemporary Polish language. Maybe not now, but several years ago or some decades ago, when the parents wanted to frighten a naughty child, they sometimes could tell a son or a daughter, be nice, otherwise the bad man will take you. In Polish it is zły pan cię zabierze, which is also connected with the serfdom, when a nobleman, when the landowner could just take a peasant from the village to do some work for him. And so this was a kind of saying that could frighten a child. I think that parents nowadays do not use it, but I know that in Polish language it is still remembered. The next thing is the proverb about Piekarski. Of course, it doesn't have anything to do with the peasant's fate. I just wanted to show that there are some families of noblemen mentioned in Proverbs. Piekarski was a nobleman. Yes, of course, he carried out an unsuccessful assassination attempt on the king, Zygmunt Waza III. He was probably insane. Some historians say that he was insane, and for this attempt, he was then tortured. He was subjected to many torture. But the main thing was to show that sometimes the families of not only about this very famous noblemen were mentioned in Proverbs, but also some other noblemen were also recorded in Proverbs, and that's why I use this proverb with Piekarski. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. According to our conference program, the coffee break has already started, so I suggest to continue our discussions, drinking a coffee or two. And let me once again thank for all of our speakers and presenters for this wonderful panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.